this week we had a tax bill from Representative Elijah Har. I think most of us are pretty concerned that it's a little irresponsible. We still are not sure what impact the federal tax cuts are going to have on our budget. And we put 16 amendments.
I think 13, yeah, 16, yeah.
Of which no one could answer any questions about what the fiscal note was going to look like on those amendments. And we have an almost 400-page or 400-plus page bill that no one can really tell us what the fiscal impact is going to be on our state. And so I think, we'll see next week once fiscal review goes through it and see what is the real impact, but we could be talking hundreds of millions of dollars. With that, we'll take some questions.
Are you confident that the special committee's report is going to be released on Monday?
I am confident that the special committee's report will not be released on Monday.
Why is that?
What I don't know is when it's going to be released.
Why are you confident that it's not going to be released?
I've been told that it's not going to be released on Monday.
Does that concern you at all?
It is concerning. We have a deadline, and I think, Representative Barnes has been promising that we were going to see that report on Monday. I have not been told why there is a delay, so I'm not really sure if there's a problem or what the situation is, but I think we owe it to the public to, we passed a resolution that said it needs to be presented, and we needed to follow that resolution.
The resolution also says that the committee has the option to kind of give themselves an indefinite extension based on whatever circumstances. Are you under the impression they're going to exercise that power?
I don't know that at this point.
Who told you that it wasn't going to be released on Monday?
I've talked to the speaker.
Did he say when? Did he say maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday?
I don't know.
And he didn't give you a reason?
No.
Did he give you a hint that it will be released, just not on Monday, or are we in an indefinite wait?
That's my understanding is it just won't be Monday.
Do you think you'll see it by the end of the session?
I would definitely hope we would.
Did a letter from a judge in St. Louis, to your knowledge, play any role in this decision not to release it on Monday?
That I don't know.
Do you have any indication that associates of the governor are working to delay the release?
I can only tell you I would assume they would be. I don't think that's played into it at this point. But I know there's the governor was trying to get it stopped, saying that it could have an impact on his criminal trial. But the reality is the governor spent $50,000 on commercials. He's already out there tainting the jury. So I don't see that our report coming out at this point does anything more than what he's already doing.
What do you want to see when that report is released in terms of either maybe not necessarily what it contains, but its accuracy, the work that's gone into it? What are your concerns about it being released?
I want to make sure that we present the public with an accurate report because that's what we've promised. We didn't say we're going to take any position one way or the other, but we owe it to the public to give them that information. And hopefully the delay will be short, but we'll just have to see.
Are you confident that the Democrats on the committee are going to sign off on the report?
I don't know that for sure yet.
Do they have any concerns, any hesitation that you know of?
I don't know that. I haven't had that conversation with them.
So it sounds like, committee members said that they would not talk about this investigation at all until the report was coming out, at least within your caucus. They're not even talking to you about it?
No, other than we've had brief conversations about the report and the delay, but in terms of what's in the report and all that, I have no knowledge of that. Anybody else?
Since I got here a little late, could you tell us about the bill you were talking about before? I was talking to barraging you with questions about the committee.
So Representative Har's tax bill. We did that on the floor this week, about 4 hours or so of debate. But at the end of the day, what we don't know is, I think what he's trying to do is admirable, but the reality is a little irresponsible in that we just don't know what the fiscal impact that's going to be on our state. We don't know what the federal impact is going to be. and to start talking tax cuts so quickly when we're already looking for dollars to make sure that we can fund the programs that we have, it's a little disheartening.
Practically
Can-
speaking,
can
do
I-
you think there's, oh, sorry.
Can I jump in on this too? Just chat on the tax bill for just a second as well. I mean, like, the First Amendment that was offered on 2540 swung the fiscal note, according to the sponsor of the amendment, swung the fiscal note $400 to $600 million in a positive direction. We're just throwing out massive numbers. We were talking about this bill as if it were another sliced bread day bill, right? I mean, there was substantive discussion at the time, but no hard numbers. It's my understanding that the group that was meeting on coming up with a consensus revenue estimate was stuck for over a month because they didn't know about what the federal impact would be, the federal legislation. I think they settled on 63 million, but I've heard people say it's going to probably be closer to 120. I've heard people say, Alarm is saying it's probably going to be like around 200 million. And then to layer on top of that, probably the most massive tax reform bill that we've ever seen in the state, on top of the federal changes where we have no idea what the impact is going to be, is irresponsible, to say the least. I mean, if we get this wrong, if we're off by a few $100 million, which would be easy to do, then we're talking about we're Kansas on steroids at that point. Kansas undid most of their tax cut. If we get this wrong, then we are doubling down on tax cuts in the state, and we're putting our AAA credit rating at risk. We're putting so many programs at risk. I was frustrated that when that amendment was offered, why didn't we lay the bill over at that point, step back, have a new fiscal analysis, new fiscal note drafted, so we can have an honest discussion before we add additional amendments. We added that amendment, and we added about, I believe, 12 more amendments where we had no idea. We were swinging. There was a net negative on at least 5 or 6 amendments that were offered, a net negative impact, but nobody knew what that was. At some point we heard, potentially 2 million, potentially 30 million impact on some of these amendments. It's irresponsible. This is by far the biggest bill that we will see, the most impactful bill that we will see all year long, and to perfect it without having any clue of what the fiscal impact will be on the state is irresponsible. It's an irresponsible way to deal with taxpayer dollars.
Do you think that with the combination of the pass-through phase-out going away and the economic growth that its advocates hope that it will generate, that this could lead to general revenue increasing in the future?
I mean, there are some good provisions in the bill, but there are it's going to be about a 500-page bill. It's going to open up over 250 different sections in statute. There are so many moving parts to think that anyone in the General Assembly has any idea what this legislation will do. I mean, we can talk about policy. There's, again, some decent policy that was added to it. But to talk about hard numbers, nobody in this General Assembly understands how all of these different amendments and how the bill is going to interact. There's just no way. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find 2 or 3 economists in the state of Missouri, the top economists, who will come to consensus on how this bill will actually interact and how it will play out. And I mean, there's nobody in this building. There's nobody. I don't even know of anyone necessarily in Jefferson City who could say that with certainty that this bill is going to be neutral.
I think the other thing to remember that what Kansas did, Kansas had to roll back some of theirs. We don't have that option. Once we pass this, the only way to roll it back is to go back to the voters. So we may not be able to, if we get this wrong, we may not have the opportunity to undo it.
Do either of you then think that maybe the best way to do tax reform, if at all, is to do it incrementally as opposed to a huge bill?
I think that would have been a better option, or at least we need more time to digest its pieces.
I think part of the intent of the bill, I think part of the intent of the bill could be also to blunt the impact of Senate Bill 509, the disastrous legislation was passed in 2014 that's going to continue to just bleed out dollars over the course of its 5-year phase-in. And I like that intent. I really do. I think that there's probably a simpler way to do it with less moving parts. And you could do it in 2 or 3 different bills over a period of time to make sure that people understand, and make sure not only just people in the body understand, but make sure economists understand and they feel comfortable about what we're doing and that we're not doubling down on tax cuts.
practically speaking, what are the chances that any omnibus tax bill is actually going to make it across the finish line this year?
I think Kansas asked. I mean, I think Kansas legislators kept saying the same thing, like, it's probably not going to pass. It's probably not going to pass. And then all of a sudden, they bankrupted their state because it did. I mean, there's a supermajority of Republicans in the building. They drive the train on a lot of legislation. So I don't think it's not dead until definitely 6 p.m. on May 18th.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is all a Republican push, and I guess you're kind of outsiders looking in at what's going on. You've got the the House version, the Senate version, then you've got the governor's version, which is not in the form of a bill per se, but do you see any push by any lawmakers to include any of the governor's wish list in any of these bills?
At this point, I think everybody is trying to distance themselves from that. So I haven't seen anything, but you're right. And these are all Republican priorities. They're not our priorities, and we have great concerns about actually what any of the proposals are going to do to some of the programs that we have fought so hard to keep.
What behavior have you noticed that indicates to you that people are trying to distance themselves from the governor?
I mean, I think the governor's name is not even mentioned. And if you notice, it's rarely mentioned on the floor. And when it is mentioned on the floor, it's not in a good way by either side. So I think people are nervous about what is going to come out of this report and are anxiously waiting to see it, to see just what's there.
Would it be too simple a statement to say that he's lost a bit of his influence as far as getting Republicans to do what he wants them to do?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I think you could argue he lost some influence when he trashed everybody in this building for 2 years and then has been alleged to have engaged in activity that's far beyond what he was even accusing members of this body of doing.
Have you gotten any indication that, more broadly speaking, on other policies that the Republican majority is trying to help out the governor getting his agenda passed, not just on taxes but other things?
I'm not really seeing that. I think everybody's kind of working on their own priorities. There is, quite frankly, when we saw the state of the state, we really didn't hear a whole lot in terms of priorities. And so I think people are kind of working off of their own, kind of what their own priorities are at this point.
Does that make it easier for the Senate and the House to do business when the governor's kind of excused from the table, or whether he's excused himself or whether he's kept away?
I don't know that it makes it any easier because there's still that dark cloud hanging over us. You can't go anywhere where there isn't a question about what's going on with the governor. Whether it is other officials from other countries that have come into the Capitol, that is the topic of discussion. I did a trip to Minnesota to look at their Capitol and the renovations that they did on their Capitol, and the conversation I had with one of their senators was about our governor. People are paying attention, they know what's going on, and it's sad because it's a dark cloud over Missouri.
We often heard when Jay Nixon was the governor, a lot of criticism from this body, from both parties, about his level of involvement or lack thereof. For whatever reason, do you feel like this governor is engaged enough with this legislature? There are bills landing on his desk that I don't think we're hearing anything about, even after they've been passed. We don't hear about legislation as it's going through the process, whether he supports it or not. Is that a good or a bad thing?
I think that's a bad thing. And while the governor says all that's going on is not impacting what's happening in this building, clearly it is. The fact that we're not seeing legislation being signed, or when it does, he's going to remote areas, when he makes his announcements and things like that. That says to me that he is not engaged with either the House or the Senate, and that's not how it should be.
Have you seen a difference in his engagement recently compared to last year, or has he always? Have you seen any difference recently?
I don't see him. Quite frankly, I could say early I would at least see him passing even sometimes in the garage, and we would speak. I haven't seen him, period.
Leader Beatty, when the committee was formed, I remember you stood there and you said that we as the legislature putting a lot of faith in Jay Barnes. You said that because of the way it was set up. Do you still have faith in the committee?
I am hopeful, but you know, I still have some concerns. Anytime you have put out the announcement that a report was going to come out on Monday and then there's a delay, it is going to create some concern. And we still are putting a whole lot of faith in Representative Barnes.
Is your understanding that the delay is coming from Representative Barnes and not Speaker Richardson?
I don't know where that's coming from.